Hey guys, welcome to The Last Historian. Tonight we wander back through the deep, misty corridors of human history to answer a surprisingly simple question. When did humans start drinking alcohol? It sounds like the kind of thing somebody asks at 2 in the morning after staring thoughtfully at a half-finished drink, but the answer takes you across thousands of years, through forgotten forests, ancient campsites, and villages that haven't even invented writing yet. Picture yourself standing beneath a canopy of trees long before cities exist. The air is warm. Insects hum lazily. Somewhere nearby, fruit has fallen from a branch and begun quietly changing into something strange. You don't know it yet, but you're about to stumble into one of humanity's longest-running hobbies. And fair warning, this journey is slow, cozy, and packed with historical details, so you probably won't survive this, by which I mean you'll likely be asleep long before we reach the Romans. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're down there, let me know your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a world that feels almost impossibly distant. There are no roads, no taverns, no vineyards stretching over hillsides, no clever advertisements promising refreshing beverages. There isn't even pottery yet. Instead, you move through landscapes shared with mammoths, giant deer, and predators that make modern wildlife seem surprisingly polite. The mainstream historical fact is simple. Humans have likely encountered naturally fermented foods for tens of thousands of years. Long before brewing existed, nature itself was already making alcohol. The process is surprisingly ordinary. Fruit falls from trees. Yeast floating through the air lands on that fruit. Sugars begin to break down. Alcohol appears. No brewery required. You walk through a clearing and discover a pile of overripe berries. Some have been sitting in the sun for days. Others are partially crushed. The smell is sweet but slightly unusual. Without understanding chemistry, ancient humans would occasionally eat these fruits. And then something interesting would happen. They might feel warm, a little dizzy, a little more cheerful, maybe even brave enough to sing badly around a campfire. Some things never change. Scientists have observed many modern animals consuming naturally fermented fruit. Birds sometimes wobble awkwardly after eating overripe berries. Elephants have been linked to stories about drunken behavior, though many famous tales are exaggerated. Still, the important point remains. Alcohol exists naturally. Human beings didn't invent fermentation. They discovered it. Or perhaps more accurately, they stumbled into it. You continue through this prehistoric world and begin noticing how often chance shapes history. Many inventions arrive because somebody carefully plans them. Alcohol probably doesn't. Instead, you can imagine a curious hunter-gatherer tasting fruit that seems sweeter than usual. Perhaps they return later. Perhaps they notice familiar sensations. Perhaps they even start seeking out these fermented foods intentionally. Scholars still argue whether early humans actively searched for alcohol-producing foods or simply enjoyed them whenever they appeared naturally. The evidence is frustratingly scarce. After all, prehistoric people rarely left behind detailed journals explaining their weekend plans. You settle beside a fire as evening approaches. Around you, small groups prepare food. Children chase one another. Adults repair tools. Someone tells a story that has probably been told hundreds of times before. History often focuses on kings and battles, but most humans spend their lives doing ordinary things. Eating, talking, laughing, resting, and perhaps, every now and then, accidentally discovering that certain fruits produce surprisingly entertaining effects. One quirky detail from this period involves a hypothesis, sometimes called the Drunken Monkey idea. The theory suggests that primates evolve an ability to detect ethanol because fermented fruit could signal valuable calories. In other words, some ancestors may have become good at finding mildly alcoholic fruit because it helped them locate energy-rich food. Imagine evolution quietly nudging future humans toward noticing the scent of fermentation. It's an amusing possibility. The road to civilization may have included more tipsy fruit than anyone expected. Night settles over the landscape. Stars appear overhead in dazzling numbers. Without city lights, the sky looks almost unreal. You watch the flickering fire and think about how many generations sit before you in the timeline. Thousands upon thousands. Most leave no names behind, yet they contribute to a chain of discoveries stretching into the present. Somewhere among them, people begin recognizing patterns. Certain foods change when left alone. Certain liquids transform over time. Certain containers produce interesting surprises after a few days. Curiosity becomes one of humanity's greatest tools. You can almost picture somebody forgetting a collection of fruit in a woven basket. Days later, they return. The contents smell different, taste different, feel different. The result may not have been delicious by modern standards, but perfection isn't necessary. Only discovery matters. As the fire crackles softly, you notice another fascinating reality. Alcohol's story is deeply connected to food. Today, people often separate drinking and eating into different categories. Ancient humans probably didn't. Fermentation happened inside foods, fruits, honey, and plant materials. The boundaries were blurry. One reason historians find this period challenging is that alcohol leaves limited traces. Stone tools survive. Bones survive. Alcohol itself does not politely wait around for archaeologists. So researchers piece together clues from chemistry, residue analysis, and comparisons with later societies. The picture remains incomplete, yet certain themes appear again and again. Humans are curious. Humans experiment. Humans enjoy discovering things that alter experience. And humans have apparently been doing all three for a very long time. The wind shifts gently through the trees. The camp grows quieter. The conversations fade. The people around you settle into sleep, unaware that their descendants will one day build breweries, vineyards, taverns, and entire industries around a process that is already quietly unfolding in nature around them. For now, though, none of that exists. Only fruit, yeast, time, and the first faint hints of a relationship that will follow humanity across millennia. In the distance, dawn begins preparing itself beyond the horizon. Soon you will continue forward, following hunter-gatherers as they encounter fermented foods more frequently and perhaps begin understanding their effects. The journey is only beginning. The berries are waiting, and history, as always, is moving slowly forward. The first light of morning slips across the landscape as you leave the quiet camp behind. The fire from the previous night has burned down to glowing embers. A few people are already awake, moving through routines repeated so many times that they barely require thought. You walk with them through a world that still belongs almost entirely to hunter-gatherers. No kingdoms, no breweries, no tax collectors inventing paperwork. Just people following animals, gathering plants, and paying close attention to the seasons. If you spend enough time here, you begin to realize something important. Ancient humans know their environments extraordinarily well. They recognize edible roots hidden beneath soil. They remember where berries ripen. They understand migration routes. They notice tiny changes that modern people often miss completely. And because they notice so much, they are also likely to notice fermented foods. The mainstream historical fact for this part of the journey is that human societies lived as hunter-gatherers for the vast majority of human history. Agriculture is actually a relatively recent development compared with the immense stretch of time spent foraging. That means any early encounters with alcohol happen long before organized farming. You move through a forest during late summer. Fruit hangs heavily from branches. Some pieces fall naturally to the ground. Others remain exposed to sunlight and warmth. As days pass, fermentation begins its quiet work. Nobody has words like ethanol or microbiology. Nature handles the technical details without asking permission. You crouch beside a patch of fallen fruit and imagine generations of foragers encountering scenes exactly like this. Perhaps some batches taste unpleasant, others surprisingly sweet. Some produce mild, intoxicating effects. Trial and error becomes a teacher. A rather unpredictable teacher, admittedly. One day you discover delicious fruit. The next day you discover fruit that makes your cousin dance badly beside a fire. History can be educational like that. You continue along a riverbank where groups gather nuts, berries, and wild plants. Food collection is rarely random. Knowledge passes carefully between generations. Parents teach children. Grandparents teach everyone. Skills become survival. If fermented foods occasionally appear within these environments, knowledge about them might spread too. Perhaps certain trees become known for producing fruit that acts funny after sitting for several days. Perhaps particular seasons become associated with unusual experiences. Nobody records these observations in books. Yet oral traditions can preserve information for remarkable lengths of time. Scholars still argue whether prehistoric communities intentionally created opportunities for fermentation before agriculture emerged. Some researchers suspect experimentation happened surprisingly early. Others believe regular alcohol production remained extremely limited until farming provided stable supplies of grains and fruits. The debate continues because evidence remains fragmentary. Ancient people unfortunately failed to leave helpful signs reading. Primitive brewing experiment happening here. Archaeologists remain disappointed by this oversight. As afternoon sunlight filters through trees, you begin noticing another interesting factor. Sugar is valuable. Very valuable. Fermentation depends upon sugars. Sweet foods naturally attract attention because they provide energy. Many animals seek them. Humans certainly do. The appeal of fermented fruit may partly arise from the same attraction. People search for calorie-rich foods. Alcohol sometimes arrives as an unexpected bonus, or perhaps an unexpected complication. Imagine trying to explain a mild hangover without any scientific vocabulary. You probably conclude that forest spirits are involved, or mischievous ancestors, or perhaps that berries occasionally wake up in a strange mood. All explanations remain equally available. One quirky detail involves modern observations of animals that deliberately seek fermented foods. Certain species appear willing to consume fruit after fermentation has begun, even when sober alternatives remain available nearby. Scientists debate exactly why. Calories? Taste? Behavioral curiosity? Nobody can ask the animals directly, although that would certainly make archaeology conferences more exciting. As evening approaches, you travel with a small group preparing a temporary camp. The process feels familiar. Shelter, food, fire, conversation. You begin seeing how alcohol's earliest history likely intertwines with community life. Drinking, even in primitive forms, is rarely a solitary activity. Humans gather together. Stories emerge. Laughter spreads. Memories form. The social aspect may be nearly as important as the chemical effects themselves. Around the fire, people share experiences. Perhaps somebody discovers particularly fermented berries. Others try them. Reactions vary. One person becomes cheerful. Another becomes sleepy. A third suddenly believes they can imitate every animal in the forest. Results are mixed. Entertainment value remains high. The stars appear again overhead. As you watch them, another possibility enters the story. Honey. Wild honey exists long before organized beekeeping, and honey contains enormous amounts of sugar. If mixed with water and left alone, fermentation can eventually produce a drink known as mead. Thousands of years later, mead will become famous across many cultures. Its origins remain difficult to trace precisely, but the ingredients exist right here in prehistory. Honey, water, yeast, time. Nature once again provides everything necessary. You imagine somebody storing honey in a container. Days pass, perhaps weeks. The contents change. Curiosity takes over. A cautious sip follows. History occasionally advances through careful planning. It also advances through people drinking mysterious liquids and hoping for the best. The ratio varies considerably. The night grows deeper. A cool breeze moves across the camp. You notice how little separates people here from the natural world. There are no supermarkets, no refrigerators, no industrial packaging. Everything depends upon observation, knowledge, patience, adaptation. Fermentation itself is part of nature's endless cycle of transformation. Foods change, plants change, seasons change. Humans learn to pay attention, and slowly, almost invisibly, those observations accumulate. Generation after generation, century after century. The relationship between humans and fermented substances deepens. Nobody realizes where it eventually leads. Nobody imagines vast vineyards spreading across hillsides. Nobody envisions medieval taverns or modern breweries. Those futures remain impossibly distant. For now, alcohol exists mostly as a curious side effect of natural processes. A strange gift from yeast. A happy accident hiding among berries and honey. Yet something important is happening beneath the surface. Humans are learning. Not formally, not scientifically, but steadily. Every observation becomes another tiny piece of knowledge. And knowledge has a habit of growing. Soon some communities will stop wandering quite so much. Fields will appear. Settlements will expand. Agriculture will transform human life forever. And once people begin producing large quantities of grain, fermentation will move from accidental discovery toward intentional creation. The sleepy camp settles into silence. The forest hums softly around you. Above, the stars drift across the darkness. Ahead, a revolution waits. Not a revolution of kings or armies. A revolution of seeds, harvests, and eventually beer. The first farmers are already approaching over history's horizon, and they're about to change everything. The stars slowly fade, and by the time the sun rises again, the world around you is beginning to change. Not all at once. History rarely works that way. There is no dramatic trumpet blast announcing that humanity has entered a new era. Nobody hangs a sign saying, "Congratulations, agriculture starts today." Instead, you notice small differences. People linger in certain places longer than before. Wild grasses receive extra attention. Seeds are collected more carefully. Storage becomes increasingly important. The changes seem modest at first, almost boring, which, as students of sleepy history know, is usually where the truly important developments hide. You walk through a settlement that would look tiny by modern standards. A few dozen structures cluster together. Smoke drifts lazily into the sky. Children play near storage pits. Adults carry baskets of grain harvested from nearby fields. And just like that, humanity has stepped into one of the greatest transformations in history. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that agriculture emerged independently in several regions of the world, roughly beginning around 12,000 years ago, although dates vary by location. Farming changed nearly every aspect of human life, from settlement patterns to social organization. It also created ideal conditions for brewing, because now, for the first time, humans possess something fermentation absolutely loves. Large amounts of stored carbohydrates. Grain. Lots and lots of grain. You stroll through a harvest scene. Bundles of wheat and barley lie drying in the sun. Storage containers fill gradually. People worry about weather, pests, and preserving food supplies. And somewhere amid these concerns, accidents begin happening. The same kind of accidents that have quietly shaped history from the beginning. Perhaps grain becomes wet. Perhaps stored mash sits longer than expected. Perhaps someone mixes ingredients together and forgets about them. Yeast, as always, remains eager to participate. Nature continues doing what nature does. Fermentation begins. The results are not always predictable, but occasionally they're interesting enough to repeat. That is the key difference. Hunter-gatherers mostly encounter fermentation by chance. Farmers gain the ability to recreate it again and again and again. The moment people realize a process can be repeated intentionally, everything changes. You can almost imagine an early farmer noticing that a particular mixture consistently produces pleasant effects. The recipe may be crude. The flavor may be questionable. Modern beverage critics would probably collapse dramatically after tasting it. Yet consistency matters more than elegance. A reliable drink has arrived, and humans notice. One quirky detail from ancient brewing involves texture. Many early beers likely looked nothing like modern beer. Some were thick, cloudy, and filled with floating grain particles. In certain cases, drinking one may have felt halfway between consuming a beverage and eating lunch. Imagine ordering a refreshing drink and receiving something with the consistency of adventurous oatmeal. Standards have evolved considerably. As you move through the settlement, you notice another consequence of agriculture. People can now produce surpluses. Not every year, not everywhere, but enough to create new possibilities. When food becomes more reliable, experimentation becomes easier. Communities gain opportunities to develop specialized skills. Pottery improves. Storage techniques improve. Fermentation improves. A cycle begins. Better containers allow better brewing. Better brewing encourages more experimentation. More experimentation leads to further improvements. Human ingenuity enters the picture. For perhaps the first time, alcohol starts becoming a deliberate creation rather than an occasional surprise. The afternoon sun warms the fields. Workers move steadily through their tasks. Life remains difficult. Farming is hard work, backbreaking work, mud-covered work, the sort of work that makes modern gym memberships seem strangely inefficient. Yet farming also creates stability. Village grow. Populations increase. Traditions emerge. And alcohol slowly becomes woven into community life. You sit beside a group preparing food for an evening gathering. Conversation flows easily. Stories pass between generations. Someone produces a fermented drink. Others recognize it immediately. That familiarity matters. The beverage is no longer curiosity. It is becoming part of culture. Scholars still argue whether the desire for beer helped encourage early agriculture or whether agriculture simply created conditions that later enabled beer production. It's one of history's most entertaining debates. Did humans farm because they wanted reliable food? Or did some ambitious ancestors look at wild grain and think, you know what this needs? Fermentation. Most historians favor food as the primary motivation. Still, the debate remains surprisingly lively. Because if humanity did partly settle down for better access to alcohol, that would be one of the most relatable developments in world history. As evening approaches, the village grows quieter. Cooking fires appear. The smell of grain drifts through the air. You begin noticing how alcohol serves purposes beyond simple enjoyment. Fermented beverages can store calories. They can become part of rituals. They can strengthen social bonds. Shared drinking often reinforces group identity. People gather, celebrate, mourn, negotiate, tell stories. The drink itself matters, but the gathering matters too. Human beings are social creatures. Alcohol often travels wherever social life goes. The sun slips below the horizon. Firelight flickers across mud brick walls. Laughter rises from nearby homes. A musician taps out a rhythm on a simple instrument. The settlement feels alive. And for the first time in your journey, alcohol has become something recognizably human-made. Not discovered beneath a tree. Not stumbled upon beside rotting fruit. Created, prepared, expected. That shift is enormous. Because once humans intentionally produce something, they tend to improve it. Recipes spread. Technique evolve. Knowledge accumulates. What begins as experimentation gradually transforms into tradition. And tradition is remarkably powerful. Generations inherit practices without fully remembering where they started. A drink made by grandparents becomes a drink made by parents. Then children learn the process. Then grandchildren continue it. Before long, the origin story fades. Only the custom remains. You watch sparks drift upward into the night sky. Somewhere beyond the darkness lie the great river valleys of the ancient world. Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. The place where cities will rise, writing will emerge, and beer will become so important that it earns a place in everyday life. Compared to the accidental berries of prehistory, it will feel like a completely new world. Yet the connection remains unbroken. The forgotten fruit, the curious foragers, the experimental farmers. Each step leads naturally to the next. The story of alcohol is becoming larger now. Civilization itself is beginning to stir. And in the centuries ahead, beer will stand right beside it. Morning arrives over a landscape unlike any you have seen so far. The forests and wandering camps of earlier ages feel distant now. Ahead of you stretch broad river plains fed by seasonal floods. Water moves steadily through channels. Fields spread outward in organized patches. Villages have grown larger. Some are becoming towns. And for the first time, you begin seeing the earliest shadows of civilization. You follow a dusty path toward one of the settlements rising in ancient Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The air is warm. Farmers move through fields of barley. Merchants carry goods from place to place. Everywhere you look, people seem busy inventing the future. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that Mesopotamia is often called one of the cradles of civilization. Some of the world's earliest cities emerged here, along with writing, organized governments, and complex economic systems. And somewhere among these remarkable achievements sits a surprisingly familiar item: beer. Lots of beer. Possibly more beer than you would expect from a civilization that is simultaneously inventing bureaucracy. You walk through a marketplace where grain is stacked in storage containers. Barley dominates the landscape. It feeds people directly, but it also serves another purpose: brewing. Unlike the accidental fermentation of prehistoric fruit, Mesopotamian beer is intentional. Recipes may vary. Quality may vary even more. But production has become a regular part of life. Beer is no longer an experiment. It is an institution. You can almost feel its presence everywhere. Workers drink it. Families drink it. Officials drink it. Even records mention it. That alone marks an extraordinary shift. For thousands of years, alcohol's history remains mostly invisible. Now, writing begins appearing. And once people start writing things down, historians become much happier. Suddenly, there are clues, documents, accounts, records, complaints, probably. Civilization always generates paperwork. You wander past a group of laborers taking a break from their work. They gather in the shade and drink from large containers. The beverage looks different from modern beer. Cloudier, thicker, less sparkling, more grain-filled. Modern drinkers expecting a cold golden lager would likely experience considerable confusion. One quirky detail is that many ancient Mesopotamians may have consumed beer through long drinking straws. These straws help people avoid floating grain particles and sediment that collected near the surface. Imagine a group of workers sharing a communal vessel through oversized straws. It sounds surprisingly modern and surprisingly ancient at exactly the same time. As afternoon sunlight reflects from irrigation canals, you begin appreciating how closely beer and agriculture remain connected. Good harvests support brewing. Poor harvests threaten it. The relationship is constant. Beer is not separate from daily life. It is woven into the economic fabric of society. Workers may receive portions of beer as part of their compensation. Families incorporate it into meals. Religious ceremonies sometimes include it. The boundaries between food, drink, and culture remain remarkably fluid. You pass near a temple complex rising above the city. Religious life plays a central role in Mesopotamian society. The gods oversee harvests, floods, prosperity, and survival itself. Offerings are made. Rituals are observed. And alcohol occasionally appears within these sacred contexts as well. Humans have a habit of bringing important things into religious life. Food, music, stories, drink. The pattern repeats across cultures throughout history. As evening approaches, the city grows louder. Animals move through crowded streets. Merchants negotiate prices. Children race through narrow alleys. You notice something else that feels distinctly familiar. People gather socially around drinks. Not because they are required to, because they enjoy it. Thousands of years separate you from the present. Yet some behaviors remain recognizable. A long day ends. Friends meet. Conversations begin. Complaints about work appear almost immediately. History has many constants. Scholars still argue whether beer played a significant role in encouraging urban development or whether it simply flourished alongside growing cities. Like many historical debates, the answer may be a bit of both. Beer benefits from organization. Cities provide organization. Cities benefit from agricultural surpluses. Agricultural surpluses support brewing. The entire system grows together. You sit beside a canal while twilight settles across the settlement. The water reflects the fading sky. Nearby, somebody hums a tune that has been forgotten for thousands of years. That realization feels strangely peaceful. Most ancient voices disappear, yet traces remain. A recipe, a clay tablet, a drinking vessel. Enough evidence survives to tell part of the story. One of the most famous examples comes from ancient Sumer, where references to beer appear in written records. The drink becomes so familiar that it earns a place within daily economic and social life. For historians, this is gold, or perhaps barley-colored gold. The details may be incomplete, but they are real. You're no longer guessing about accidental berries beneath trees. You are standing in a world where brewing has become visible, recorded, remembered. The night deepens. Torches flicker along streets. The city settles into its evening rhythm. Some people prepare for tomorrow's work. Others continue talking long after darkness arrives. The smell of baked bread drifts through the air. And here you notice another curious connection. Bread and beer often share ingredients. Barley, grain, yeast, human ingenuity. In many ways, they are cousins. One becomes food, the other becomes drink. Both emerge from the agricultural revolution that changed human existence forever. The connection feels fitting. Civilization itself rests upon grain. Grain feeds cities. Cities create culture. Cultura shapes tradition. And beer quietly follows every step. You lean back and watch stars emerge above Mesopotamia. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other civilizations are developing their own relationships with alcohol. Different ingredients, different techniques, different traditions. Yet the same underlying process continues. Fermentation, transformation, discovery. The story is expanding now. The villages of early farmers have become cities. The accidental experiments of prehistory have become established customs. And ahead waits another great civilization beside another mighty river. A land of pyramids, temples, and workers who receive beer as part of everyday life. Ancient Egypt is waiting just beyond the desert, and it is remarkably thirsty. The sun rises over the desert with a quiet confidence that only ancient landscapes seem to possess. You leave the canals and cities of Mesopotamia behind and travel westward toward another river that shapes the destiny of millions. Soon the Nile appears before you, winding through the desert like a ribbon of life. Everything here depends on it. The fields, the villages, the cities, the temples. Without the Nile, ancient Egypt would be a very different story. And without grain from the Nile's fertile banks, Egypt's long relationship with beer might never have developed quite the same way. You follow a path along the river as farmers begin their daily work. The air is already warming. Birds skim over the water. In the distance, workers move steadily through fields of barley and emmer wheat. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that beer was an important staple in ancient Egypt and was consumed across many levels of society. It appears regularly in archaeological evidence, artistic depictions, and written records. In other words, beer isn't a niche hobby here. It's practically part of the scenery. You arrive at a bustling settlement where bread is baking, grain is being processed, and large containers stand ready for brewing. The smells are earthy and familiar. Warm grain, fresh bread, fermenting mash. Life unfolds according to rhythms tied closely to agriculture. The Nile floods. Fields grow. Harvest arrive. Beer follows. You watch workers carrying supplies through narrow streets. Many of them receive food and drink as compensation. Beer often forms part of that arrangement. To modern eyes, it might seem unusual. To Egyptians, it makes perfect sense. Beer provides calories. Beer stores relatively well. Beer fits naturally into everyday meals. You sit in the shade of a simple structure while activity continues around you. Families prepare food. Traders negotiate. Children play games in the dust. And throughout the settlement, beer appears again and again. Not necessarily consumed for drunkenness. Not necessarily treated as a luxury. Often it is simply part of daily life. A familiar presence. Much like bread. One quirky detail from ancient Egypt is that some beers may have been flavored with ingredients such as dates, herbs, or honey. The resulting drinks likely varied significantly depending on region, ingredients, and brewing methods. Modern beer enthusiasts sometimes spend hours debating flavor profiles. Ancient brewers were already experimenting thousands of years earlier, although they probably had fewer podcasts about it. You continue toward a larger construction site where laborers work beneath the hot sun. Massive building projects characterize much of Egyptian history. Temples rise. Monuments expand. Tombs take shape. Large workforces require organization. They also require food and drink. Historical evidence suggests workers involved in major projects often received rations that included beer. Contrary to popular myths, the builders of the Great Pyramids were not simply enslaved masses driven without support. Many workers received food, housing, and compensation. History is often more complicated than the movies. As afternoon approaches, heat shimmers above the ground. You find shelter beneath a canopy and watch the river move lazily past. The Nile seems eternal. Generation after generation depends upon its reliability. And within that dependable cycle, brewing becomes part of a broader cultural system. Beer appears at celebrations. Beer appears in households. Beer appears in religious contexts. Life events and drinking traditions intertwine. Humans are remarkably consistent in this regard. Give us a significant moment, and sooner or later somebody brings refreshments. You wander through a market where merchants display goods from across the region. Baskets overflow with produce. Pottery lines market stalls. Voices fill the air. Civilization feels alive here. Organized, confident, stable, at least most of the time. And because society has become increasingly complex, specialized knowledge flourishes. Brewers improve techniques. Farmers refine cultivation methods. Artisans create better containers. Every improvement supports another. Civilization operates like a giant web of interconnected skills. Beer benefits from all of them. Scholars still argue whether ancient Egyptian beer would taste remotely pleasant to modern drinkers. The answer depends largely on the specific recipe. Some reconstructions suggest certain varieties might be surprisingly enjoyable. Others sound more like experimental grain soup with ambitions. The truth likely varies enormously. Thousands of years of brewing produce countless local styles. No single recipe represents them all. As evening approaches, shadows stretch across the riverbank. Fishing boats drift through golden light. The temperature softens. People gather with family and friends after long days of work. The atmosphere feels peaceful, and perhaps that is one reason alcohol becomes so enduring. Not because every society drinks in exactly the same way. Not because everyone shares identical attitudes toward it, but because drinking often becomes associated with community. Meals shared together, stories exchanged, moments of rest after labor. You watch an elderly storyteller surrounded by listeners. His audience laughs at familiar tales. Children sit nearby. Adults nod along. The scene feels timeless. Thousands of years separate this gathering from the present day, yet the emotional texture remains familiar. Humans enjoy gathering. Humans enjoy stories. Humans enjoy rituals that bring people together. Alcohol frequently finds a place within those rituals. The sky deepens toward orange and purple. Torches begin appearing throughout the settlement. You think back to the prehistoric camps from earlier in your journey. The accidental berries. The curious foragers. The first farmers. How far the story has traveled. What began as natural fermentation has become a structured tradition supported by one of the world's great civilizations. And yet the story is still young. Beyond Egypt lie new cultures and new beverages. Another transformation waits across the sea. There, grapes rather than grain begin claiming the spotlight. Wine will rise. Trade routes will spread it across regions. Entire societies will shape identities around it. The humble beer of farmers and laborers will soon share history's stage with another drink destined for greatness. The Nile glimmers beneath the first stars of evening. The river keeps flowing. History keeps flowing too. And somewhere beyond the horizon, vineyards are beginning to spread across ancient landscapes, preparing the next chapter in humanity's long and surprisingly thirsty journey. Morning arrives with the scent of salt carried on a gentle breeze. You leave the fertile banks of the Nile behind and move toward the shores of the ancient Mediterranean. The landscape changes gradually. Rivers become coastlines. Grain fields give way to hillsides. Merchant ships appear on the horizon like small, drifting shadows. And among those hillsides, something new begins to dominate the story. Grapes. Lots of grapes. More grapes than any reasonable person could eat before they spoil. Which, as it turns out, is exactly where wine enters the picture. You wander through an early vineyard where rows of vines stretch across sunlit slopes. Workers move carefully between them, inspecting fruit ripening beneath warm skies. The atmosphere feels different from the grain-focused worlds of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Beer remains important in many places, but here, wine is steadily becoming a cultural force. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that wine production developed in parts of the ancient Near East and Caucasus region thousands of years ago, eventually spreading widely throughout the Mediterranean world. Unlike beer, which relies heavily on cultivated grain and brewing processes, wine often begins with a simpler foundation. Harvest grapes. Crush grapes. Wait. Nature does the rest. Yeast once again proves eager to help. You stand near a large container where freshly harvested grapes have been gathered. Workers crush them underfoot in a method that would probably trigger several modern health inspectors simultaneously. It works. Juice collects. Fermentation begins. Transformation follows. The process feels almost magical to people living thousands of years before modern chemistry. Sweet juice slowly changes into something entirely different. A liquid that can travel, age, and carry value across great distances. You walk beside merchants preparing cargo for a voyage. Amphorae, large ceramic containers, are loaded carefully onto ships. Some hold oil. Others contain grain. Many contain wine. And this introduces one of wine's greatest advantages. It travels well. Beer often remains local. Wine can become international. Ancient trade routes begin carrying it across coastlines and between civilizations. A vineyard on one shore can influence drinking habits hundreds of miles away. You watch sailors preparing to depart. The sea glitters beneath bright sunlight. Their journey may take days or weeks, depending on conditions. Storms threaten. Pirates occasionally appear. Navigation remains difficult. Yet merchants continue sailing because valuable goods await eager buyers. Wine becomes one of those goods. One quirky detail from ancient wine history involves flavoring. Many wines were mixed with herbs, spices, resins, honey, and other ingredients. Some ancient recipes would probably seem exotic today. Others might sound slightly alarming. Imagine ordering wine and receiving a mixture enhanced with tree resin and mysterious botanical additions. Ancient drinkers often viewed this as perfectly normal. You continue inland toward a prosperous settlement where wine production supports local wealth. The vineyards create jobs. The trade creates opportunities. The beverage itself becomes associated with hospitality and status. A visitor arrives. Wine is offered. An agreement is discussed. Wine appears. A celebration occurs. Wine returns. Patterns begin emerging. As societies grow more complex, alcohol often acquires symbolic meaning beyond simple consumption. You sit beneath a shaded structure overlooking rows of vines. The afternoon air hums softly with insects. Looking across the landscape, it becomes clear that geography shapes drinking culture. Mesopotamia has abundant grain. Egypt has abundant grain. Mediterranean regions possess ideal conditions for vineyards. Different environments encourage different traditions. Human creativity does the rest. The result is a remarkable variety of alcoholic beverages developing across ancient societies. No single drink dominates everywhere. Instead, local conditions guide local preferences. History often grows from practical realities. People work with what their land provides. Scholars still argue whether wine initially spread primarily because of trade opportunities, elite prestige, religious significance, or simple enjoyment. Most likely, all four factors contribute. Human behavior rarely fits into neat categories. A product can be useful, symbolic, profitable, and enjoyable simultaneously. Wine manages all four quite effectively. As evening approaches, a gathering begins near the vineyard. Tables are arranged. Food is prepared. Guests arrivent. Conversation fills the air. The scene feels elegant compared to the work camps and farming villages you visited earlier. Yet beneath the surface, familiar themes remain. People gather. Stories are exchanged. Relationships strengthen. Alcohol helps create a shared experience. Thousands of years pass, but that basic pattern persists. You notice that wine is often diluted with water during many ancient periods. To modern audiences, this can seem unusual. But for many ancient cultures, drinking undiluted wine might be considered excessive or uncivilized. Social norms develop around alcohol just as surely as production methods do. The drink matters. The rules surrounding it matter too. Civilizations create expectations. How much to drink? When to drink? With whom to drink? Every culture develops its own answers. The sun begins sinking toward the horizon. Golden light spills across the vineyard. Workers finish their tasks. Merchants secure their cargo. Families prepare evening meals. The vines sway gently in the breeze. You think about how far humanity has come since the accidental fermented berries of prehistory. At first, alcohol belongs to nature. Then it becomes a discovery. Then a craft. Now it is becoming an industry. A trade good. A cultural symbol. The story grows larger with every century. And the Mediterranean is only getting started. Ahead lies a civilization that will embrace wine with remarkable enthusiasm. A place where drinking becomes tied to philosophy, politics, social status, and long conversations that stretch late into the night. The Greeks are waiting. They will debate ideas, tell stories, and occasionally drink enough wine to make both activities considerably more complicated. The sea darkens beneath the first appearance of evening stars. Ships continue moving across the water. Amphorae continue changing hands. Wine continues spreading from coast to coast. And history quietly prepares for another gathering, another toast, and another chapter in humanity's long relationship with alcohol. The Mediterranean morning arrives in layers of soft gold and pale blue. You leave the vineyards behind and travel toward a world of white stone buildings, busy harbors, olive groves, and hills crowned with temples. The sea sparkles endlessly beside you. Merchants unload cargo. Fishermen prepare their boats. Philosophers are already forming opinions about things nobody asked them to explain. You have arrived in ancient Greece. And if there is one thing the Greeks enjoy almost as much as discussing ideas, it is creating organized social events specifically designed for discussing ideas while drinking wine. This is where alcohol becomes something more than a beverage. It becomes a performance, a ritual, a social art form. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that the symposium played an important role in many ancient Greek communities. These gatherings combined drinking, conversation, entertainment, music, and intellectual discussion. The word itself has traveled across centuries. Today, people hear symposium and imagine academic conferences with name tags and uncomfortable chairs. Ancient Greeks heard it and often thought of wine. Much better marketing, honestly. You make your way through a city-state as evening approaches. The streets gradually fill with people finishing their daily tasks. Shopkeepers close stalls. Sailors return from the harbor. The heat of the day begins to fade. Soon guests start arriving at a private gathering. Servants prepare food. Musicians tune instruments. Couches are arranged around the room. Large vessels of wine stand ready. The atmosphere feels relaxed but structured. There are customs, expectations, rules. Even drinking has etiquette. You settle quietly among the gathering and observe. The wine is mixed with water before being served, a common Greek practice. Drinking straight wine is often viewed as excessive. Moderation, at least in theory, is encouraged. In practice, humans remain humans. Theory and reality do not always cooperate. The evening begins politely. People discuss politics, trade, poetry, military affairs. Then another round of wine appears, and suddenly everyone becomes much more confident about their opinions. Some historical traditions never disappear. One quirky detail from Greek symposia involved drinking games. Participants sometimes competed in contests that involved flicking wine dregs from cups toward targets. Imagine spending years studying philosophy only to end your evening launching drops of wine across a room. Civilization contains multitudes. You listen as conversations drift from practical matters toward larger questions. What is justice? What creates a good life? What is courage? Can virtue be taught? Alcohol doesn't create philosophy, of course, but it certainly helps create environments where long conversations flourish. The Greeks become famous for debating nearly everything, and many of those debates happen in social settings where wine is readily available. The room grows warmer. Laughter becomes more frequent. Stories become more dramatic. A sailor's minor storm somehow transforms into an epic struggle against nature itself. A merchant's routine journey becomes a heroic adventure. Wine occasionally assists memory in highly creative ways. You notice how deeply alcohol has become woven into Greek culture. Not merely consumed, discussed, regulated, celebrated, represented in art. Even religion reflects this importance. The Greeks associate wine with divine forces through stories involving gods and rituals. Alcohol becomes linked to themes of celebration, transformation, and social connection. These ideas resonate strongly throughout Greek society. Scholars still argue whether the symposium primarily serves intellectual purposes, social bonding, elite networking, or entertainment. As with many historical questions, the answer is probably all of the above. Humans rarely attend gatherings for only one reason. People come to exchange ideas. People come to strengthen friendships. People come because the food is good. And sometimes people come because they heard there would be free wine. History remains wonderfully practical. Outside, moonlight spreads across quiet streets. Inside, the gathering continues. A musician begins playing softly. Poetry is recited. Guests respond with enthusiasm that may or may not be entirely related to literary quality. You begin noticing another development in alcohol's history. Drinking is now becoming associated with identity. Different societies have different customs, different rules, different expectations. To participate properly in a Greek symposium demonstrates cultural knowledge. You understand the rituals. You understand the etiquette. You belong. This social function proves remarkably important throughout history. Alcohol often serves as a marker of community membership, not because everyone drinks, but because societies develop shared practices around drinking. The customs themselves become meaningful. The evening drifts onward. The room grows quieter in some corners and louder in others. A philosopher continues explaining an extremely complicated theory. Most listeners stopped following the argument 20 minutes ago. Nobody wants to admit it. So everyone nods thoughtfully. This, too, is a timeless human tradition. The night, air cools outside. Stars shine above the city. You think back to the ancient farmers who first discovered reliable fermentation. Could they imagine this scene? A room filled with intellectual debates, artistic performances, and carefully mixed wine? Probably not. Yet every step follows naturally from the ones before it. Agriculture crée surplus. Surplus supports cities. Cities encourage culture. Culture transforms drinking into ritual. The chain continues. As midnight approaches, the gathering finally begins winding down. Guests prepare to leave. Conversations slow. Musicians pack away instruments. The last cups are emptied. Tomorrow, daily life resumes. Ships will sail. Markets will open. Fields will be worked. But tonight leaves its mark. Friendships deepen. Ideas spread. Stories survive. Alcohol plays its part, not as the center of civilization, but as one thread woven through it. And beyond the Greek world, another power is rising. A civilization that admires many Greek traditions and eventually carries them across vast territories. The Romans are coming. They will build roads, expand empires, and transport wine farther than ever before. The Mediterranean world is about to become even more connected. And naturally, the drinks are coming along for the journey. The dawn arrives over the Mediterranean with a calm confidence. But the world beneath it is changing once again. You leave behind the city-states of Greece and travel westward along busy sea lanes. Merchant ships crisscross the water. Harbors grow larger. Roads stretch farther. Everywhere you look, signs of expansion appear. Soon, one city begins standing above the rest. Rome. At first, it is merely another settlement among many. Then it becomes a republic, then a regional power, then something far larger. Eventually, Rome grows into an empire so vast that it connects millions of people across 3 continents. And wherever Romans go, their habits travel with them, including their drinking habits. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that wine became deeply embedded in Roman society. It was consumed throughout the empire and played an important role in daily life, trade, agriculture, and social customs. You approach a Roman town just after sunrise. The streets are already busy. Merchants arrange goods. Laborers begin their work. Officials hurry through administrative duties. Somewhere, somebody is already complaining about taxes. Civilization remains remarkably consistent. The smell of baking bread drifts through the air. Nearby, carts carry amphorae filled with wine. The containers seem almost everywhere. Rome drinks on a scale that would impress many previous civilizations. Part of the reason lies in the empire's enormous reach. Roman roads connect distant regions. Trade routes move goods efficiently. Agricultural production expands. Wine production grows alongside it. You follow a road leading toward vineyards beyond the town. Workers move between rows of vines. The scene feels familiar after your journey through earlier Mediterranean cultures. Yet everything appears larger, more organized, more interconnected. Rome excels at systems, and wine becomes part of one very large system. Vineyards produce wine. Merchants transport it. Cities consume it. Taxes are collected. Trade continues. The cycle repeats. You stop beside a roadside inn where travelers gather before continuing their journeys. Soldiers sit near merchants. Farmers share tables with craftsmen. News spreads through conversation. Food is served. Wine appears almost automatically. The empire may stretch thousands of miles, but certain routines remain universal. People arrive tired. People eat. People drink. People exchange stories. Then they complain about road conditions. Some things truly transcend time. One quirky detail from Roman drinking culture is that wine was sometimes mixed with ingredients ranging from honey and herbs to seawater. Yes, seawater. Ancient recipes occasionally take surprising turns. Whether every mixture was delicious remains a question best left to brave, experimental historians. You continue toward a military camp positioned along one of Rome's frontiers. Here you see another reason alcohol becomes important. Empires require logistics. Huge amounts of logistics. Food must move. Supplies must move. People must move. And beverages move right along with them. Roman soldiers often receive wine as part of their provisions. The drink becomes familiar across the empire's military network. A soldier stationed far from home may still encounter familiar drinking customs. Shared traditions help create cohesion, and empires depend heavily upon cohesion. As afternoon sunlight warms the countryside, you watch traffic flow steadily along Roman roads. These roads are among the empire's greatest achievements. Built for military efficiency, trade, and communication, they connect regions in unprecedented ways. Wine benefits enormously from these connections. A vineyard in one province can supply consumers hundreds of miles away. Trade expands. Markets grow. Local products become regional products. Regional products become imperial products. Alcohol is no longer merely part of local culture. It is part of an interconnected world. You pause beneath the shade of a tree and observe travelers passing by. Some carry goods. Others carry news. A few carry rumors that become increasingly dramatic with every retelling. Humanity remains deeply committed to creative storytelling, and alcohol occasionally helps those stories become even more imaginative. As evening approaches, you enter a prosperous Roman household preparing for a banquet. The setting feels grand compared to earlier gatherings. Decorated rooms. Finite boudoir. Multiple courses. Guests dressed in their best clothing. The wealthy elite often use banquets to display status and reinforce social relationships. Food matters. Conversation matters. Wine matters too. Servants move between guests, refilling cups. Discussions range from politics to philosophy to business opportunities. Some debates become lively. Others become repetitive. A few become so complicated that nobody remembers how they started. The wine continues flowing regardless. Scholars still argue whether Roman drinking habits differed dramatically between social classes or whether similarities outweighed differences. The evidence suggests both patterns existed. The wealthy enjoy expensive varieties. Ordinary people consume more modest options. Yet wine itself appears across much of society. Different quality levels, different occasions, same basic beverage. That broad accessibility helps explain its influence. Night settles over the city. Torches illuminate streets. The distant sounds of conversation drift through open windows. Rome feels alive even after dark. You think about the journey so far. The accidental fermentation of fallen fruit. The first farmers. Mesopotamian beer. Egyptian brewing. Greek symposia. Now Roman roads, carrying wine across an empire. Each step builds upon the previous one. Alcohol's story mirrors the growth of civilization itself. As societies become larger and more connected, drinking traditions spread farther and become more diverse. New techniques emerge. New tastes develop. New customs form. The process never really stops. Yet even mighty empires eventually change. Rome's power will fade. Political systems will shift. Trade networks will transform. New religious movements will spread. The ancient world, is slowly moving toward another era. But alcohol remains. It adapts. It survives. And in the centuries ahead, an unexpected group will help preserve and improve brewing knowledge. Not merchants, not soldiers, not emperors. Monks, quiet, disciplined monks. People devoted to prayer, study, and surprisingly effective brewing. The Roman night grows still beneath a sky filled with stars. The roads continue stretching into darkness. And somewhere far ahead, monastery bells are preparing to ring. Morning arrives softly across the hills of medieval Europe. The great Roman Empire that once connected vast territories has faded into history. Roads still exist. Cities still stand. Trade continues in various forms. But the political landscape looks very different now. Kingdoms rise and fall. Borders shift. Languages evolve. Life becomes more local in many places. Yet as you travel through the countryside, one sound repeatedly reaches your ears. The ringing of monastery bells. Their steady rhythm drifts across fields and forests alike. And behind monastery walls, something rather important is happening for the history of alcohol. You follow a winding path toward a stone monastery perched on a hillside. The building is simple but impressive. Gardens surround it. Livestock graze nearby. Workshops hum quietly with activity. The atmosphere feels peaceful, organized, disciplined. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that medieval monasteries often became important centers of learning, agriculture, and brewing. Monks helped preserve knowledge and refine many practical skills during the Middle Ages, including, rather famously, the making of beer. You step through the monastery gates and immediately notice how busy everyone is. Monastic life is not idle life. Monks pray, study, copy manuscripts, farm, cook, maintain buildings. And yes, brew. A lot of brewing takes place here. Partly because monasteries must support themselves. Partly because brewing provides nourishment. Partly because clean, reliable beverages are useful. And partly because humans continue to enjoy fermented drinks regardless of century. Some traditions prove remarkably durable. You walk toward a brew house where steam rises gently into the morning air. Inside, workers move carefully between large vessels. Grain is processed. Water is heated. Ingredients are measured. Compared to the accidental fermentation of prehistory, the process now appears astonishingly sophisticated. Generations of experience have accumulated. Techniques improve. Recipes improve. Consistency improves. Human beings have been practicing for thousands of years by this point. They're getting better at it. One quirky detail from medieval brewing involves fasting periods. In some traditions, monks consumed certain types of strong beer during fasts because liquid nourishment could help sustain them. The logic may sound creative to modern ears. Then again, medieval people were often quite creative when interpreting dietary rules. You can almost imagine a monk thoughtfully examining a large mug and concluding, technically, this is still a liquid. History occasionally contains moments of remarkable flexibility. You spend time observing daily life within a monastery. Everything follows a schedule. Bells mark hours. Prayers structure the day. Work fills the spaces between. The rhythm feels steady and calming. And within that rhythm, brewing becomes another skilled craft. The monks do not approach it casually. They observe results carefully. Record information, refine methods. Practical knowledge accumulates over time. As afternoon sunlight filters through narrow windows, you notice how monasteries serve as centers of stability. Outside the walls, political events may change rapidly. Inside, routines continue. That continuity helps preserve knowledge across generations. A monk teaches an apprentice. The apprentice becomes a master. Methods pass forward. Centuries unfold. The chain remains intact. Brewing benefits enormously from this process. You walk through storage areas lined with barrels. The smell of grain and wood fills the air. Nearby, gardens provide herbs and other ingredients. Everything feels interconnected. Agriculture support brewing. Brewing supports the community. The community supports learning. Learning improves agriculture. A cycle emerges. The same pattern has appeared repeatedly throughout your journey. Human progress often happens through small improvements repeated consistently over long periods. Scholars still argue whether monastic brewing's greatest contribution lies in technical innovation, organizational consistency, agricultural development, or quality control. The answer is probably some combination of all four. Rarely does a single factor explain historical success. Usually many influences work together. You leave the monastery briefly and travel through nearby villages. Life for ordinary people remains demanding. Most individuals work hard simply to meet daily needs. Fields require constant attention. Animals require care. Homes require maintenance. Yet alcohol remains woven into everyday existence. Ale and beer appear regularly at meals and gatherings. Not necessarily because people seek intoxication, often because these beverages provide calories and fit naturally within local food systems. The distinction is important. Historical drinking habits frequently differ from modern assumptions. Alcohol occupies many roles simultaneously. Food, tradition, commerce, hospitality, celebration. The categories overlap. As evening approaches, you return to the monastery. The setting sun casts long shadows across stone walls. Monks gather for evening prayers. Their voices echo softly through halls. The atmosphere grows quieter, more reflective. You think back to the bustling Roman banquets of the previous section. The contrast is striking. Yet both worlds contribute to the same ongoing story. Roman trade networks spread wine. Medieval monasteries refine brewing. Different eras leave different legacies. Alcohol adapts accordingly. That adaptability may be one reason it remains such a persistent feature of human history. Societies change, drinks change, customs change, fermentation stays, the evening deepens, candles flicker, the monastery settles gradually into silence. Some monks continue studying by dim light. Others prepare for sleep. Outside, a cool breeze moves through the fields. You realize another major shift is approaching. Beyond monastery walls, towns are growing. Markets are expanding. Trade is increasing. People are gathering in larger numbers once again. And wherever people gather, certain establishments inevitably appear. Places offering food, conversation, shelter, and drinks. The medieval tavern is waiting. It will be louder than the monastery. Messier too, considerably messier, but it will reveal another side of alcohol's role in everyday life. The bells ring one final time before night settles completely. The sound drifts across the countryside, then fades, and somewhere beyond the darkness, tavern doors are beginning to open. The morning mist lingers low over the countryside as you leave the monastery behind. The quiet bells fade into the distance. The ordered routines of monastic life give way to muddy roads, crowded marketplaces, and growing towns where life feels considerably less predictable. The medieval world is becoming busier. Trade routes carry goods between settlements. Craftsmen establish workshops. Merchants arrive with wagons full of merchandise. Travelers move from village to village carrying news, rumors, and occasionally information that is actually accurate. And wherever travelers gather, taverns begin appearing. You spot one long before reaching it. A wooden sign swings gently above the entrance. Smoke curls from the chimney. Voices spill through the doorway. The building looks welcoming in a way that only a place serving food and drink can. You step inside. Immediately, warmth surrounds you. The smell of roasting meat fills the air. Benches crowd the room. People talk over one another. A dog sleeps beneath a table, completely uninterested in human affairs. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that taverns, inns, and alehouses served as important social centers throughout much of medieval Europe. They provided food, lodging, conversation, and beverages for locals and travelers alike. In many communities, the tavern becomes one of the most important public spaces. Business happens here. Friendships form here. Arguments happen here. Many of those arguments probably begin with complete confidence and very little evidence. Humanity remains consistent. You settle near a window and observe the room. Farmers discuss harvest prospects. Merchants compare prices. Travelers exchange stories from distant towns. The tavern functions almost like a community information network. Long before newspapers, radio, or social media, people rely on face-to-face conversation. Information travels at the speed of walking, which occasionally improves its quality, and occasionally does not. A serving girl places mugs of ale on a nearby table. The drink is familiar to everyone present. Nobody pauses to admire it. Nobody takes photographs. Nobody writes lengthy reviews describing hints of oak and distant memories of autumn. It is simply part of life. Available, expected, ordinary. That everyday presence tells you something important about alcohol's role in medieval society. For many people, drinking is not an extraordinary event. It is woven into daily routines. One quirky detail from the medieval period is that alewives, women who brewed and sold ale, often played significant roles in local communities. Brewing is frequently a household activity, and many women become highly skilled producers. In fact, some historians note that brewing was often associated with women before larger commercial operations gradually transformed the industry. History occasionally surprises people who assume certain professions always belong to one group or another. Reality is usually more complicated. The tavern door opens again. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that taverns, inns, and alehouses served as important social centers throughout much of medieval Europe. They provided food, lodging, conversation, and beverages for locals and travelers alike. In many communities, the tavern becomes one of the most important public spaces. Business happens here. Friendships form here. Arguments happen here. Many of those arguments probably begin with complete confidence and very little evidence. Humanity remains consistent. You settle near a window and observe the room. Farmers discuss harvest prospects. Merchants compare prices. Travelers exchange stories from distant towns. The tavern functions almost like a community information network. Long before newspapers, radio, or social media, people rely on face-to-face conversation. Information travels at the speed of walking, which occasionally improves its quality, and occasionally does not. A serving girl places mugs of ale on a nearby table. The drink is familiar to everyone present. Nobody pauses to admire it. Nobody takes photographs. Nobody writes lengthy reviews describing hints of oak and distant memories of autumn. It is simply part of life. Available, expected, ordinary. That everyday presence tells you something important about alcohol's role in medieval society. For many people, drinking is not an extraordinary event. It is woven into daily routines. One quirky detail from the medieval period is that alewives, women who brewed and sold ale, often played significant roles in local communities. Brewing is frequently a household activity, and many women become highly skilled producers. In fact, some historians note that brewing was often associated with women before larger commercial operations gradually transformed the industry. History occasionally surprises people who assume certain professions always belong to one group or another. Reality is usually more complicated. The tavern door opens again. You can almost forget how many centuries separate it from the present. People gather, eat, drink, listen to music, tell stories, complain about local politics. The details change. The pattern survives. Scholars still argue whether medieval water quality significantly increased reliance on ale and beer. The popular claim that people avoided water entirely is generally considered an exaggeration. People certainly drank water, but fermented beverages often held important places within local diets and daily routines as well. As usual, historical reality proves more nuanced than simple myths. Outside, darkness begins settling over the town. Inside, the tavern grows louder. Not wildly loud, comfortably loud. The sound of community. You watch generations interacting beneath one roof. Young apprentices, experienced craftsmen, elderly storytellers, travelers passing through. Everyone shares the same space. The tavern becomes a crossroads where lives briefly intersect, and alcohol helps create that shared environment. Not by itself. The food matters. The shelter matters. The people matter most. But the drinks remain part of the experience, a familiar companion to conversation. As the evening continues, you think about how far alcohol has traveled through history, from naturally fermented fruit in prehistoric forests, to beer in Mesopotamian cities, to Egyptian workers along the Nile, to Greek philosophers, to Roman merchants, to medieval monks and townsfolk. The story keeps evolving, and another major change is approaching. For thousands of years, fermentation has dominated alcohol production. Soon, however, people begin mastering a new technique. A technique capable of creating beverages far stronger than traditional beer or wine. Distillation. The process will transform drinking habits across large parts of the world. It will create entirely new categories of alcohol. And somewhere in a workshop not yet famous, experiments with heat, vapor, and condensation are beginning to change history. The morning begins not in a tavern, vineyard, or monastery, but beside a collection of curious equipment. At first glance, it looks almost mysterious. Metal vessels, coils, tubes, containers arranged in unusual ways. Steam rises gently from a heated chamber. Drops of liquid form slowly and collect elsewhere. The entire setup feels less like cooking and more like somebody attempting to have a conversation with physics. In a sense, that is exactly what is happening. You have arrived at one of the most important turning points in the history of alcohol. Distillation. For thousands of years, humans rely primarily on fermentation. Beer, wine, mead, all emerge through natural biological processes. Now another method begins changing the story. Instead of merely creating alcohol, people learn how to concentrate it, and the results are considerably stronger. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that distillation techniques developed gradually over centuries, drawing on knowledge from various cultures and scientific traditions. By the medieval and early modern periods, distilled beverages began appearing more widely across different regions. The process itself sounds surprisingly straightforward. Heat a fermented liquid. Alcohol evaporates at a lower temperature than water. Capture the vapor. Cool it. Collect the condensed liquid. The result contains a higher concentration of alcohol. Simple in theory, less simple in practice, especially before modern equipment exists. You watch an early practitioner carefully monitor a distillation apparatus. Every step requires attention. Temperatures matter. Timing matters. Equipment matters. Mistakes happen. Occasionally very unpleasant mistakes. History often advances through experimentation. Experimentation sometimes advances through accidental explosions. Fortunately, today's demonstration remains peaceful. The first drops begin collecting. Clear, potent, different. You immediately understand why this development matters. Distilled spirits occupy a completely different category from traditional beer and wine. A smaller quantity can produce a much stronger effect. Humanity has essentially discovered how to upgrade alcohol. And like many upgrades throughout history, people quickly become interested. One quirky detail involves the early names given to distilled alcohol in some regions. Terms like water of life emerge in various languages. The phrase sounds poetic, a little dramatic perhaps, but understandable. Imagine encountering distilled spirits for the first time after centuries of relatively mild beverages. You might conclude that something extraordinary has occurred. You continue through workshops and laboratories where experimentation flourishes. Many early practitioners are not trying to create recreational drinks, at least not initially. They are interested in medicine, alchemy, scientific inquiry, practical chemistry. Distillation becomes part of a broader effort to understand substances and transformations. The boundaries between science, medicine, and philosophy remain blurry. Knowledge develops through observation. Trial, error, more trial, occasionally more error. As afternoon approaches, you visit a marketplace where distilled products are beginning to circulate. People examine them with curiosity. Some view them as medicines. Others see commercial opportunities. A few simply wonder what happens if they drink them. The answer arrives quickly, very quickly. Unlike beer or wine, distilled spirits make a strong first impression. No lengthy introduction required. You notice how alcohol's role continues expanding. It is no longer merely a drink. It is becoming a product category, an area of innovation, a field of expertise. Different regions begin developing distinct traditions. Local ingredients influence production. Climate influences storage. Culture influences consumption. Variety increases dramatically. Scholars still argue whether medicinal applications or recreational uses drive the early popularity of distilled alcohol in different regions. The evidence suggests both play important roles. Many historical developments refuse to stay inside a single category. People discover a useful substance. Then they find additional uses. Then someone discovers commercial potential. Then the process accelerates. Human history contains this pattern repeatedly. You travel onward toward a busy trading center. Merchants discuss prices. Craftsmen comparent technique. Knowledge spreads along the same routes as goods. A successful method in one area eventually appears elsewhere. Innovation travels. Distillation follows familiar paths. Trade networks, cultural exchanges, migration, curiosity. The same forces that spread wine and beer now spread spirits. The evening sun casts long shadows across the town. You enter a gathering where travelers share stories from distant regions. Some speak of unusual beverages. Others discuss new production methods. The world feels increasingly connected. Information moves more quickly than before. Not instantly, of course. No one is sending medieval text messages. But compared to earlier centuries, the pace of exchange is accelerating. The conversation eventually turns toward medicine. This feels appropriate. For many people, distilled alcohol remains strongly associated with healing. Treatments, remedies, preservation. The distinction between medicine and beverage can become surprisingly flexible depending on circumstances. History occasionally demonstrates remarkable creativity when defining health practices. You sit quietly and listen. Outside, darkness settles. Inside, candlelight flickers across wooden tables. The room smells faintly of herbs, smoke, and spirits. You reflect on how dramatically alcohol has changed since your journey began. Prehistoric fruit ferments naturally beneath trees. Farmers learn to brew. Civilisation refine technique. Monasteries preserve knowledge. Taverns spread customs. Now distillation introduces an entirely new chapter. The progression feels almost inevitable in hindsight. Yet every step depends upon countless individuals making observations, conducting experiments, and passing knowledge forward. The chain stretches across thousands of years, and it is still growing, because distilled spirits soon find powerful allies. Sailors, merchants, navies, empires expanding across oceans. The age of exploration is approaching. Ships will travel farther than ever before. Global trade networks will emerge, and one particular spirit will become famous among seafarers. Rum. Its story waits just beyond the horizon. The final candles burn low. The gathering begins to disperse. Above, stars shine across a clear night sky. The world is becoming larger, more connected, more mobile, and alcohol is preparing for one of the greatest voyages in its long history. The sun rises over an ocean that seems to stretch forever. Gone are the familiar roads and towns of medieval Europe. Gone are the vineyards tucked into Mediterranean hillsides and the quiet monasteries overlooking fields. Now you stand on the deck of a wooden ship. The vessel creaks softly beneath your feet. Canvas sails billow overhead. Salt spray drifts through the air. And around you lies one of the most powerful forces in human history, the sea. For centuries, sailors have crossed oceans carrying people, goods, ideas, and occasionally very questionable decisions. As maritime travel expands during the early modern period, alcohol travels too. And among the many drinks that spread through global trade networks, one becomes particularly famous: rum. You watch crew members moving through their morning routines. Some adjust rigging. Others inspect supplies. A few stare toward the horizon with the practiced expression of people who have spent far too much time looking at water. Life aboard ship is demanding. Space is limited. Comfort is rare. Everything smells faintly of salt, wood, and hard work. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that rum becomes closely associated with maritime trade and naval life during the age of exploration and expanding global commerce. Its rise connects directly to larger economic systems. Sugar production expands. Trade networks grow. Distillation techniques improve. Rum emerges from these developments and quickly gains importance. You sail onward beneath clear skies. Days pass. The ocean remains beautiful and repetitive in equal measure. Water in every direction. More water tomorrow, and likely more water after that. It's easy to understand why sailors appreciate anything capable of breaking monotony, including a drink. One quirky detail from maritime history involves the daily rum ration that becomes associated with certain naval traditions. Sailors in some navies receive measured portions as part of routine life aboard ship. Imagine spending months at sea with only limited entertainment options. A scheduled drink starts, sounding surprisingly appealing. You lean against the ship's railing and watch flying fish dart briefly above the waves. The ocean possesses its own rhythm. Wind, water, wood, everything moves together. Life aboard ship depends heavily on routine. Meals occur at specific times. Tasks follow established schedules. Discipline matters, because mistakes at sea can become dangerous very quickly. Alcohol occupies an interesting position within this environment. It provides comfort and familiarity, but excessive drinking creates obvious risks. A sailor climbing rigging several stories above the deck needs reliable balance. The sea does not reward carelessness. As afternoon sunlight glitters across the water, your ship approaches a busy port. The harbor buzzes with activity. Merchant vessels arrive from distant destinations. Cargo moves constantly. Languages mix together. Ideas travel alongside products. The world is becoming increasingly interconnected. Rum benefits enormously from this connection. Produced in one region, transported across oceans, consumed somewhere entirely different. The pattern feels familiar. Wine spreads through ancient trade. Beer spreads through cultural exchange. Rum spreads through global commerce. Different eras, same principle. Humans love moving interesting beverages from one place to another. You wander through crowded docks where workers unload barrels and crates. The atmosphere feels energetic, commercial, ambitious. Empires are growing. Trade routes are expanding. Fortunes are being made and lost. And throughout it all, alcohol remains intertwined with economic life. Merchants trade it. Governments tax it. Consumers purchase it. The cycle continues. Scholars still argue whether rum's historical significance stems primarily from its economic role, its maritime associations, or its cultural influence across different societies. As usual, the answer is probably all three. History rarely offers simple explanations. Complex systems produce complex outcomes. The afternoon gives way to evening. You find yourself listening to sailors tell stories beneath a sky turning orange and gold. Every crew possesses storytellers, people who transform ordinary events into legends. A rough storm becomes a battle against nature itself. A large fish becomes an enormous sea monster. A routine voyage becomes an epic adventure. Alcohol does not invent storytelling, but it occasionally assists the process. You notice another important aspect of drinking traditions. They create identity. Sailors develop customs distinct from farmers. Merchants develop customs distinct from monks. Different communities adopt different rituals. The drinks matter. The rituals matter even more. Shared habits help people feel connected to a group. That social function remains one of alcohol's most enduring characteristics throughout history. The stars emerge one by one above the ship. The sea darkens. Lanterns glow softly along the deck. The atmosphere feels strangely peaceful. You think back across your journey. Prehistoric forests, Mesopotamian cities, Egyptian riverbanks, Greek gatherings, Roman roads, medieval monasteries, taverns filled with conversation. Every stage reveals another layer of humanity's relationship with alcohol. And now the story has become global. Ships carry drinks across oceans. Trade links distant regions. Cultures influence one another. The scale has expanded dramatically. Yet another transformation waits ahead. For most of history, alcohol production remains local or regional. Brewers know their communities. Winemakers know their customers. Distillers work on relatively small scales. That is about to change. Machines are coming. Factories are coming. Science is coming. The Industrial Revolution will transform production methods in ways earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Alcohol will become more standardized, more efficient, more widely available. The age of industry approaches. The ship continues gliding across calm water beneath a sky crowded with stars. The sails catch a steady breeze. The ocean whispers softly against the hull. And somewhere beyond the horizon, smokestacks are beginning to rise. The horizon changes before you even realize it. At first it's subtle, just a faint smudge of darker shapes, where open sea once stretched endlessly clean. Then the shapes sharpen. Vertical lines. Structures. Movement that is not wind or water. Smoke. You are approaching land that looks nothing like the quiet harbors of earlier centuries. This is the industrial age, and everything is louder here. You step off the ship into a port that feels alive in a completely different way. Not the slow rhythm of sailing vessels and wooden docks, but the constant churn of machines, carts, and factories. Iron replaces wood in many places. Steam replaces wind in others. And time itself seems to move faster. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that the Industrial Revolution dramatically transformed production systems in the 18th and 19th centuries, including food and beverage manufacturing, leading to large-scale, standardized production of alcohol. You walk through streets where barrels are stacked in enormous quantities. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Beer is no longer just something brewed in homes, monasteries, or small taverns. It is now produced in factories. Large ones, mechanical ones, efficient ones. Inside a brewing facility, you hear a steady rhythm of operations. Metal equipment hisses. Steam vents release pressure. Workers monitor gauges. Processes that once depended on experience and intuition are increasingly guided by measurement and repetition. Consistency becomes the goal. Uniform taste, uniform strength, uniform quality. Alcohol is becoming industrialized. One quirky detail from early industrial brewing is how temperature control becomes a breakthrough factor. Once brewers learn to manage fermentation more precisely, beer quality becomes far more reliable across large batches. It sounds simple now, but at the time, it is revolutionary. You move through a bustling urban district near the factories. Processes that once depended on experience and intuition are increasingly guided by measurement and repetition. Consistency becomes the goal. Uniform taste, uniform strength, uniform quality. Alcohol is becoming industrialized. One quirky detail from early industrial brewing is how temperature control becomes a breakthrough factor. Once brewers learn to manage fermentation more precisely, beer quality becomes far more reliable across large batches. It sounds simple now, but at the time, it is revolutionary. You move through a bustling urban district near the factories. Workers finish long shifts and head toward public houses. The pub replaces the medieval tavern in many regions, but the social function remains familiar. People gather after work. They talk. They rest. They drink. After hours of mechanical labor, the human need for social space becomes even more important. Alcohol remains part of that transition. A way to unwind. A way to connect. A way to step out of industrial rhythm for a moment. Scholars still argue whether industrialization improved or worsened drinking habits overall, since increased availability also meant increased consumption in some areas, while improved regulation and awareness reduced harm in others. As always, the truth is complicated. The same simple ingredients that once fermented accidentally in prehistoric forests now pass through highly engineered systems. The continuity is almost poetic. Outside, the city hums with industrial life. Inside pubs and working-class gathering places, alcohol serves as a social anchor. Not because people are escaping reality entirely, but because they're negotiating a new one. Industrial life is structured, demanding, fast-paced. Shared drinking spaces provide a pause, a moment of human connection in an increasingly mechanical world. One historical detail often discussed is how industrial-scale alcohol production leads to stronger regulation over time. Governments begin implementing laws, taxes, licensing systems. Public health discussions gradually emerge as consumption patterns change. Alcohol is no longer just a cultural tradition. It is also an economic and social policy issue. You walk past posters, notices, and regulations pinned near public buildings. The tone is formal, administrative, very different from ancient clay tablets recording barley rations. Yet the underlying theme remains similar. Societies organizing how alcohol is produced and consumed. As evening falls, factory lights glow against the darkening sky. Machines continue operating. Shifts change. Workers come and go. The city never fully sleeps, but people still seek rest within it. You enter a quieter neighborhood where smaller pubs and community spaces offer refuge from industrial noise. Inside, conversation flows more gently. Music plays softly. Glasses clink. Despite all technological change, human behavior remains remarkably familiar. People still gather, still share stories, still unwind together. Alcohol continues to play its long-standing role in social life, not as the center of civilization, but as one of its recurring companions. The night deepens outside. Steam rises into the cold air. And as you watch the industrial city stretch toward the horizon, you realize something important. Alcohol has survived every major transformation so far. From accidental fermentation, to agriculture, to cities, to empires, to monasteries, to global trade, to industrial production. Each era reshapes it, not erase it, but the next era brings new questions. What happens when society begins questioning alcohol itself? What happens when health, morality, and public debate enter the story in a much larger way? You are approaching a time of reflection. Temperance movements, scientific studies, modern regulations, and a world trying to understand both the benefits and consequences of thousands of years of drinking culture. The story is not ending. It is becoming more complex and more self-aware. The factory lights flicker in the distance as the industrial age settles fully around you. The industrial city slowly quiets as the night deepens, but it never truly becomes still. Even in darkness, there is movement, trains in the distance, factory chimneys cooling, lamps flickering in narrow streets where people continue their routines long after sunset. But something new is happening in this world. For the first time in your journey, alcohol is no longer just a drink, a tradition, or a trade good. It is becoming a subject of debate, a problem, a solution, a symbol, and sometimes all of these at once. You walk through a city square where posters are pinned to wooden boards. Some promote moderation, some promote restriction, some warn of consequences, others defend personal freedom. The atmosphere feels different from earlier eras, more self-aware, more argumentative. The mainstream historical fact for this section is that temperance movements and alcohol reform efforts gained significant momentum in the 19th and early 20th centuries in many parts of the world, leading to regulations, restrictions, and even prohibition policies in some regions. For thousands of years, alcohol spreads through culture almost unquestioned in its existence. Now, society begins asking questions about it. Should people drink less? Should governments intervene? Should alcohol be restricted? Or is it simply a normal part of human life that requires balance rather than elimination? You continue down a busy street and enter a public hall where a discussion is taking place. Not a tavern gathering, not a casual conversation, but a formal debate. People sit in rows listening to speakers argue different positions with conviction. Some emphasize health concerns. Others emphasize tradition. Others focus on personal liberty. The room feels charged with intellectual energy. Alcohol, once quietly woven into daily life, is now something people actively analyze. One quirky detail from historical temperance movements is how some reformers promoted alternative beverages with strong moral framing, sometimes calling them pure or safe drinks designed to replace alcohol entirely. Human beings rarely abandon habits without creating substitutes. You step back outside into the cool evening air. The city feels divided in subtle ways. Some establishments advertise temperance-friendly spaces. Others continue traditional drinking culture unchanged. Most places fall somewhere in between, a negotiation between old habits and new ideas. You notice how alcohol's role is shifting again, not disappearing, but being redefined. You pass workers leaving factories at the end of their shifts. Many head toward familiar gathering places. Pubs, social clubs, corner cafes. These spaces remain important, even as debates about alcohol grow louder. Because regardless of policy discussions, humans still seek connection after long days. Alcohol often appears in those moments, not always as the focus, but as part of the environment. The industrial world has made life faster, louder, and more structured. And in response, people continue to seek spaces where time slows down again. Scholars still argue whether temperance movements were primarily driven by genuine public health concerns, moral and religious motivations, or broader social changes brought by industrialization. The truth likely includes all of these factors. History rarely moves in a straight line. It shifts through overlapping influences. As the night deepens further, you enter a quieter neighborhood where smaller gatherings take place inside homes. Here, conversations feel more personal. Families discuss daily life. Neighbors share news. The tone is less political, more human. Alcohol appears in some households, absent in others. Choices vary widely. You begin noticing another important shift. The tone is less political, more human. Alcohol appears in some households, absent in others. Choices vary widely. You begin noticing another important shift. In earlier eras, alcohol was deeply embedded in almost every aspect of society. Now, it is becoming more regulated, more contextual, more consciously consumed. The world is learning to categorize it. Food or drug, tradition or risk, culture or concern. The answers differ depending on place and perspective. You sit near a window and watch rain begin to fall outside. The industrial glow of the city reflects on wet streets. The sound of distant machinery mixes with the steady rhythm of water. It feels like standing between two versions of humanity, one shaped by long-standing traditions, another shaped by modern systems and scientific understanding. Alcohol exists in both, and both are trying to define what it means. You think back to earlier chapters of your journey. The accidental fermentation of fruit, the birth of brewing in agricultural societies, the role of beer in ancient civilizations, wine in Mediterranean cultures, monasteries preserving knowledge, taverns shaping community life, distillation transforming potency, global trade spreading drinks across oceans, industrial production scaling everything up. Now society begins evaluating it all, not rejecting, not fully embracing, but reflecting. And that reflection becomes part of alcohol's story too. As midnight approaches, the city grows quieter. Debates fade into memory. Posters flutter gently in the wind. Lights dim in windows. People return home. And in the silence that follows, you realize something important. Alcohol's history is no longer just about discovery or production. It is about understanding. Understanding its place in human life. Its benefits. Its risks. Its meanings. And how those meanings change across time. The rain slows outside. The industrial city rests under a dark sky. And somewhere beyond this moment, another era is already forming. A modern world where alcohol is studied scientifically, regulated legally, marketed globally, and consumed in countless variations across cultures. The story is still unfolding. But tonight, it pauses long enough for reflection. The rain has stopped by the time you step into the final stretch of your journey. The streets are quieter now, not because the world has slowed down, but because it has settled into a kind of familiarity. Modern life hums in the background, cars in the distance, glowing windows, soft electrical light replacing the flicker of fire. You are no longer walking through ancient camps or medieval towns. You are standing inside the modern world. And alcohol, once again, is here, not as a mystery, not as a discovery, but as something fully integrated into human life, science, law, culture, and commerce all at once. The mainstream historical fact for this final section is that in the modern era, alcohol is globally produced, widely regulated, scientifically studied, and culturally diverse in its forms of consumption, ranging from traditional beverages to industrially produced drinks. You walk through a contemporary city where alcohol appears in many different forms. Supermarkets display rows of beverages from around the world. Bars advertise craft drinks with carefully designed branding. Restaurants pair meals with curated selections. At the same time, public health campaigns, legal restrictions, and cultural movements coexist alongside this availability. Everything exists at once. Support, caution, tradition, innovation. The modern relationship with alcohol is no longer simple. It is layered. You pass a small gathering of people outside a cafe. They are not part of any ancient ritual or formal symposium. They are just talking, laughing, sharing a moment after a long day. A few drinks sit on the table, but they are not the center of attention. The conversation is. This might be one of the most important transformations in the entire journey. Alcohol remains present, but it is no longer universally central. Its role has become contextual, chosen, defined by culture, law, and personal preference. One quirky detail of the modern era is the rise of craft brewing and artisanal alcohol production, where small producers experiment with flavors, ingredients, and traditional methods, often reviving ancient techniques while adding modern creativity. In a way, it feels like the past and present are collaborating. You continue walking and notice how globally connected the world has become. Drinks once tied to specific regions now appear everywhere. Beer styles that originated in one part of the world are brewed in another. Wine regions ship internationally. Distilled spirits travel across continents within days. The journey that once took centuries through trade routes now happens almost instantly through global logistics. Yet even with all this speed and technology, the core process remains unchanged. Fermentation still begins with simple ingredients. Yeast still transforms sugar. Time still matters. Nature still does its quiet work. Humans still observe, still experiment, still refine. Scholars still argue whether modern alcohol consumption is more influenced by cultural tradition, global marketing, or individual lifestyle choices shaped by social environments. As always, the answer is not singular. It never has been. You find yourself standing on a bridge overlooking the city at night. Lights reflect on water below. Traffic moves steadily. People move between destinations. Life continues in countless directions at once. And in that movement, alcohol exists as one thread among many. Sometimes celebrated, sometimes restricted, sometimes avoided, sometimes embraced. Its role depends entirely on context. You think back across everything you have witnessed. Prehistoric forests where fermentation happened by chance. Early humans discovering strange effects in overripe fruit. Agricultural societies intentionally brewing grain-based drinks. Ancient cities making beer and wine central to daily life. Philosophers debating ideas over cups in Greece. Roman roads carrying wine across continents. Monasteries preserving brewing knowledge through quiet centuries. Taverns and inns becoming social hubs. Distillation introducing stronger spirits. Ships carrying alcohol across oceans. Factories producing it at scale. Modern societies debating its place in health, law, and culture. Every era reshapes alcohol, but none erase it. Because at its core, alcohol is not just a substance in this story. It is a reflection of human behavior, of curiosity, of social connection, of experimentation, of celebration, and sometimes of excess. Scholars still argue whether alcohol's persistence in human societies is primarily due to biology, culture, or a combination of both deeply intertwined factors. Perhaps the answer lies in the same pattern you have seen throughout this journey. Humans adapt what exists in nature, then refine it, then embed it into culture, then question it, then redefine it again. And the cycle continues. The wind moves gently through the city streets. Lights shimmer across buildings. Somewhere nearby, music drifts from an open doorway. A group laughs softly inside. Life continues in its ordinary, familiar rhythm. You realize that the story of alcohol is really a story about people. Not just what they drink, but how they gather, how they work, how they celebrate, how they argue, how they remember, and how they change. The world grows quieter as the night deepens. The bridge beneath you feels still. The water below reflects scattered light like fragments of older eras. And for a moment, everything feels connected. From ancient berries falling into forgotten forests, to modern cities filled with choice and variety. It is all part of the same long human thread. You take one final look across the glowing skyline. Then slowly, the noise of history seems to soften. Not ending, just resting. Because tomorrow, somewhere, someone will still gather, still talk, still share food, still share stories. And somewhere in that moment, alcohol will still be there too. Not as the center of everything, but as one small part of a much larger human story. The journey gently fades, like light turning into night. Breath slows, thoughts soften, and the weight of thousands of years settles into quiet understanding. Sleep comes easily now. Soft, warm, unhurried. Sweet dreams.